This story took place 2 years ago when I was looking for a new house, but I found something that I could never forget. When I first moved into the house on Blackthorn Lane, I thought I'd found a haven, a charming 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch tucked at the end of a tree-lined street. The house had that timeless feel, with its white shutters and creaking floors that spoke of stories long past. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but for someone like me, looking for a fresh start after a messy divorce, it was enough. The price was suspiciously low, but the realtor brushed it off. "It's been on the market a while," she said, with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I signed the papers without hesitation, eager to start a new chapter. The neighbors weren't much help either. Their greetings were polite, their glances a little too quick. It wasn't long before I realized no one lingered near the house. The first few nights were quiet, too quiet, if I'm honest. I was used to city noise, cars passing, people shouting, the hum of life just beyond my walls. Blackthorn Lane was silent at night, the kind of stillness that creeps under your skin. I chalked it up to nerves, but by the third night, I started hearing it, a soft tapping from within the walls. It was subtle at first, a faint, irregular pattern that made me think of pipes expanding or the house settling. I told myself it was nothing, even when it persisted into the early hours. But by the next week, the tapping had grown louder, and worse, it wasn't alone. That's when I began hearing the whispers. They were low at first, barely audible. Muffled murmurs, like a conversation happening just out of reach. I'd strained to listen, convinced it was the wind slipping through the cracks. But no matter where I went, bedroom, kitchen, or living room, the whispers followed, skittering along the edges of my consciousness. It all came to a head the night I decided to investigate the attic. I'd been hearing what sounded like footsteps above my bedroom, heavy and deliberate, pacing back and forth. My heart raced as I climbed the narrow stairs, flashlight trembling in my hand. The attic door groaned as I pushed it open, and the air that greeted me was thick, stale, and cold. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing piles of forgotten junk, cracked picture frames, dusty trunks, broken furniture. My breath fogged in the frigid air as I stepped deeper into the space. Then I saw it. In the far corner, half shrouded in shadow, stood a figure. At first, I thought it was a mannequin or a lifeless thing abandoned by the previous owners. But as the light hit it, I realized how wrong I was. The figure was a man, or what had once been a man. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and hollow, black pits that seemed to swallow the light. He wore a tattered suit, its fabric hanging loose on his skeletal frame, and he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me. My body froze, paralyzed by a fear I'd never known. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. Then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The corner was empty. I scrambled down the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I dove into the house's history. Old newspapers, internet searches, and local records painted a grim picture. The house had been empty for years, abandoned after its previous owner, Victor Holloway, vanished without a trace. Before that, his wife had died there, a freak accident, the details of which were vague. Rumors swirled about Victor, claiming the house was cursed, that he'd hear voices calling his name, feel unseen hands brushing his shoulders. I should have left then and there, but something about the house pulled me in, a dark magnetism I couldn't shake. That evening, I decided to explore the basement, a part of the house I'd avoided since moving in. It was damp and cold, the smell of mildew thick in the air. As I swept my flashlight across the stone walls, something caught my eye, a rug in the center of the floor, out of place in the otherwise barren room. Underneath was a trapdoor, its wood warped with age and bolted shut. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to leave it alone. But curiosity won out. With a crowbar and trembling hands, I pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into blackness. The air grew colder with each step I took, and the faint metallic smell of blood filled my nose. At the bottom, I found a small room. The walls were lined with shelves that sagged under the weight of rotting books and jars, filled with unidentifiable things. In the center was a crude stone altar, its surface stained dark with something I didn't want to identify. That's when I felt it. A presence. Heavy, oppressive, like a hand pressing against my chest. I spun around, my flashlight flickering. The whispers began again, louder this time, a symphony of voices clawing at my ears. Then I saw him, the figure from the attic. He stood at the foot of the stairs, his hollow eyes fixed on me. But he wasn't alone. Shadows coalesced around him, forming shapes, faces contorted in agony, hands reaching toward me. "Get out," a voice growled, deep and guttural. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted up the stairs, the whispers rising to a deafening roar behind me. The trapdoor slammed shut as I stumbled into the kitchen, gasping for air. I didn't pack. I didn't even lock the door. I drove straight out of town, the house growing smaller in my rearview mirror. It's been months since that night, and I've tried to move on. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my new apartment, I hear faint whispers, soft, distant, and waiting. It all happened 1 year ago, and my story started with a rumor. There was an old rumor in my hometown. People say there's a hidden tunnel deep in the woods on the outskirts of town. No one knows exactly where it is, and the stories are always vague whispers about disappearances, strange sounds, and shapes that lurk in the darkness. I thought it was just one of those campfire tales, meant to scare kids into staying out of the forest. But last autumn, I found it. I was hiking alone, like I often do. The air was crisp, the leaves a patchwork of reds and yellows beneath my boots. The woods felt quieter than usual, that eerily so. No bird songs, no rustling leaves, just silence. I didn't notice I'd wandered off the trail until I saw something glinting beneath a pile of leaves. I knelt and brushed the leaves aside, revealing a rusted iron grate embedded in the ground. My heart raced as I cleared more debris. It was old, the metal corroded and covered in moss. Beneath the grate was a black void, a tunnel leading straight down into darkness. The rational part of me wanted to walk away, but curiosity is a powerful thing, and against my better judgment, I pried the grate open. The metallic groan echoed through the woods, loud and intrusive. Beneath it was a ladder, old but sturdy enough to hold my weight. I lowered myself into the darkness, step by cautious step, gripping the rungs tightly. The air grew colder as I descended, heavy with the smell of damp stone and something metallic blood. Perhaps. The dim light from above faded, swallowed by the blackness below. When my feet finally touched the ground, I clicked on my flashlight. The beam revealed a narrow stone tunnel stretching endlessly in both directions. The walls were jagged, carved by hand, and slick with moisture. A faint draft whispered past me, carrying a chill that made my skin crawl. As I walked deeper into the tunnel, the walls began to change. What started as rough, unremarkable stone became covered in carvings, etched images that seemed primitive, yet disturbingly detailed. The first carvings were simple, crude figures huddled together, surrounded by swirling patterns. But as I continued, the images grew more elaborate and more unsettling. The figures were contorted, their mouths open in silent screams. Shapes surrounded them, larger and monstrous, with clawed hands and jagged teeth. The tunnel felt alive, as though the carvings were watching me. Shadows danced on the walls, and for a moment I could have sworn the figures moved. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber. My flashlight flickered as it illuminated the space. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like jagged teeth, and the floor was littered with bones. Some were animal at least. I hoped they were, but others were too long, too thin to be anything natural. In the center of the room stood a circular structure. It was a well, made of the same black stone as the walls, covered in sharp, angular carvings. The air around it was colder than anywhere else in the tunnel, and I felt a faint vibration beneath my feet, like the earth itself was alive. I approached cautiously, my breath visible in the freezing air. The well seemed to pull me toward it, an unseen force drawing me closer. I leaned over the edge, shining my flashlight down. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then, the surface rippled, like water. But this wasn't water. Shapes moved just beneath the surface, twisted, writhing things with too many limbs and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. The well began to hum, a deep, resonant sound that rattled my bones. The carvings on its surface glowed faintly, their edges pulsating with a sickly green light. I stepped back, heart pounding, but before I could turn, the ground trembled. The hum grew louder, echoing through the chamber. My flashlight flickered, plunging me into darkness. When it came back on, I wasn't alone. Figures stood around the edges of the chamber, emerging from the shadows. They were hunched and twisted, their forms barely human. Their faces were hollow voids, their mouths frozen in grotesque, silent screams. They began to move toward me, their limbs jerking unnaturally. I stumbled back, my legs shaking, but the well pulsed with light, and the air around me grew impossibly cold. The figures reached for me, skeletal hands clawing at the air. I don't know how I found the strength to move, but I ran. I didn't think I just ran. My feet slipped on the wet stone, my flashlight swinging wildly, casting fleeting glimpses of those things closing in around me. I reached the ladder and scrambled up, my hands slipping on the rungs. The hum from the well followed me, louder now, a roar that seemed to vibrate in my skull. When I finally emerged into the woods, I slammed the grate shut and ran, not stopping until I reached my car. I never went back.